On our last program, we found that the program was a little off of Chopin and more towards the piano artistry of Josef Hofmann. And David, is that going to be the case today?
Perhaps Hofmann and Chopin were the same person. His repertory certainly had much Chopin in it. Stan Waldoff, who had such an exciting conversation with me about Hofmann, is back, and perhaps, yes, we will deviate a bit, because Hofmann is a great interpreter of Chopin, and we will hear him do the concertos. Where we stand in the Chopin series is at the piano concertos. So yesterday we heard the larghetto of the E minor, of the F minor concerto. Stan, we're back to Hofmann today.
Yes, the late and great Josef Hofmann, or as his wife affectionately referred to him, Jef.
Right, yes, he called him Jef.
About whom one could go on for days, constantly stimulated by him, constantly awed by him, and constantly learning from him, although, as I said yesterday, it's very difficult to really pick out any individual thing. It's more the sense of the man, the phrasing, the sound, the conceptions, just quite fabulous.
The style of the man himself. Instead of hearing all of the concertos, as long as we have moved toward a Jef program, as you called it before, Josef Hofmann program, let's hear those extraordinary fingers in what I think was a joy for him to play, the spinning song of Mendelssohn. What did you think of that, Stanley?
Well, of course, I mean, it's just so fabulous that words can't describe it. You know, David, I think perhaps we should mention an interesting point about Hofmann. Although he was spawned out of the great Romantic tradition, he was really one of the first, if not the first pianist of that era, to really pay attention to the composer's indications on the page. He was also interesting in other ways, being what we might now term as a modern pianist. He was almost void of affectation.
Indeed.
And he also...
he suffered in the early years because everyone said...
Yes, a cold pianist, a cold...
Right, cold. Like as Rubinstein's Chopin was criticized because it didn't have the sentimental mannerisms and hands not hitting together, chords, things like that.
Yes, even the cropping of the hair, the very short hair, which was obviously not the style in those days.
Surely. And that was a reaction against the excesses of Romanticism.
Yes, what is also quite interesting is that his teacher, Anton Rubinstein, the great Anton Rubinstein, probably the only pianist in his lifetime to rival Liszt, at least on stage.
Certainly in the sense of printed material, the second most eminent pianist that ever lived.
Yes. Hofmann talks about having studied with Anton Rubinstein, and he said Anton Rubinstein was so careful about Hofmann being absolutely faithful to the printed page. Do what the composer tells you, and if you can do more, fine. I think that was his philosophy.
Yes, I think Hofmann said that it takes a lifetime just to find out what's in the printed page.
Yes, absolutely. Hofmann seemed always to do what was there and yet go beyond that. It's interesting that when he studied with Anton Rubinstein, he never brought in a piece more than once. Again, this gets back to what we were talking yesterday, which was a reluctance on his part to record, because it was only for the moment. Rubinstein said, "Don't bring in a piece next week because I'll have a completely different idea on it, and it will only confuse you."
Exactly, and Rubinstein was a fragmented man in many ways, a titanic experimenter at the keyboard, who was after the massed effect. And as Anton Rubinstein said, I miss enough notes in one concert to make up another concert. This was basically not Hofmann, who was a perfectionist, very few wrong notes, and although he had his bad days, and like he was still in the great tradition of the romantic pianist, and the idea that he didn't want a performance imprisoned, the idea of
yes, it was more of an improvisatory thing with Hofmann, as opposed to changing the score completely. It was that his conceptions were spawned out of the moment, rather than having been calculated in every single aspect.
There was a basic plan, of course, but the spontaneity of the moment counted for the sheer inspiration of the playing. You know, on the recording with the F minor concerto, there is a little interview. It doesn't come out well. It's certainly done many years ago. But let's hear Hofmann's voice.
Mr. Hofmann, we're calling to congratulate you on your 76th birthday.
I only feel 1 day older today.
We wanted to congratulate you on that fact.
My birthday was yesterday. Very kind of you indeed. I am very ardent listener on your radio broadcasts, naturally, with so many other people, and I enjoy it greatly.
Well, I tell you, sir, there's so many people all over the world that are interested in you.
Well, I am one of them.
And you're interested in preserving your privacy, too, I know that, sir.
Well, I retired and I'm taking it easy and doing other kind of work, always my hobby, mechanics and electronics and chemistry. That was my hobby. And now I am free to do as I please.
So you were not...
I'm not interrupted by concert work.
That was an interruption for you, was it?
In a way, yes. Although even on the Pullman trains and so on, when I traveled in hotels, I worked mentally, made notices and sketches and things like that. When I came back, I went in the shop, my mechanical shop that I had for 35 years, and I experimented with things. I had a very good help, a good mechanician, who unfortunately died 10 years ago. Now I'm doing things all by myself.
What sort of things, Mr. Hofmann?
Oh, for example, in improvement in piano actions and in piano tone amplification and in recordings for piano quality tone. The tone quality usually is not as satisfactory as voice and violin and other instruments.
No, piano is one of the hardest things to record.
Because it's a percussion instrument, and yet it aims on sustained quality. You see, they expect a singing tone from a piano, which is really a percussion instrument. And it's very difficult, especially in recordings. It's very difficult to bring about. Well, that's as much as I could tell you.
It's very exciting to hear a man who says he's only 1 day older, and yet we know he's lived 76 years.
I think if you take not exactly mathematics, but just arithmetic, you'll find it's just exactly 1 day since my birthday was yesterday. Now that I'm not in public eye anymore...
Well, you'd be surprised how much you're in the public eye.
Well, musicians, perhaps music students, haven't quite forgotten me.
I'm sure they haven't, as a matter of fact.
The general public, because they lose interest, somebody is off the stage or the platform, and of course they lose interest, and you can't blame them for it because they're constantly newcomers.
But you, sir, will never be forgotten so long as your records exist and so long as there are people alive who've heard you play in person.
Yes, there's some people, especially the older generation.
And again, happy birthday to you.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Thanks.
Well, that was Josef Hofmann in the only interview that I have ever heard. Have you ever heard any, Stan?
No, but I understand, David, that when you were in California, you saw a film of his playing of the Beethoven Third?
Yes, I did. Of the Emperor.
Of the Emperor, I'm
right.
sorry.
A film of the last movement, and...
What was he like? What was it like watching?
Well, this was a Bell telephone broadcast, and it was extraordinary. I think it's one of the only copies left, if not the only, of this program, and Robin Comagere of Genesis Records has it in his vault, and I said, can I see it? And it was just extraordinary watching him in the wings. You're not sure if he was concentrating or
completely
just
bored.
Really, completely bored. And he got out there, and the movements were the spring of a tiger inside that nervous system, and this ability to produce a sonority from the bass register of the piano, which was absolutely frightening.
Yes, I hate right-handed pianists, as he said.
Yes, very, very good.
I noticed one thing in the interview which parallels exactly what Horowitz was talking about
in the Sunday Times,
on Sunday.
yes.
And this is the thing about the problem of the piano being not a singing instrument, and yet the music is written as if it were, almost.
Yes, it's a problem, an obsession with, I think, every great pianist, especially the ones playing the music composed for the soul of the piano, the true resources of the instrument, that here is a percussion instrument trying to be an orchestra or a voice, and especially the idea of the singing tone, the cantabile sound. Chopin students would say he didn't play loudly, but he could draw an immense sound from his cantabile.
Yes, before we move on to hear another gem from Hofmann, I think it might be worthwhile to mention something else. We've talked about the fabulous fingers, the wonderful sense of phrasing, the beautiful sound, but it's also interesting to note Hofmann's use of the pedal. He was rather Spartan in that. It was almost a kind of classical approach to playing romantic music.
Yes.
Quite amazing.
Although sometimes the pedal effects...
Yes, he was a great master of the pedal, and
were amazing.
Yes, yes.
He had learned, so I heard from one source, from Scriabin how to pedal.
Yes, very interesting. And it's also interesting that although, of course, Hofmann had this magnificent facility, he was really interested only in what one could do with the music. There is a story that he was at the Curtis, where he was director in his later years, listening to one of his students, a now famous pianist, whom we won't mention, and he turned to the person next to him and said, "Marvelous fingers, but no heart."
Yes, no heart, no poetry. Let's hear his poetry in the F-sharp major nocturne. Well, your tongue is hanging out, of course.
Oh, well, what can one say? I mean, if the beauty were not alone, those inner voices that he finds, I mean, just drives one right up the wall. I tend to get very exorbitant about Hofmann at almost any moment of the day, and especially when we're on the air.
It's about the only thing that brings you alive recently.
Well, that's probably true. That's probably true.
It's good to see you up. But well, Hofmann did excite the human race, and
but more than that, he was the pianist. I mean, not the popularity in a sense of the great Paderewski, but a pianist. I mean, everyone was in awe.
What was that story when he first came to America? And Paderewski, of course, was the big deal. And a journalist said, "Have you heard Paderewski play?"
Oh yes. Have you ever heard Paderewski play professionally? And he said, "I've only heard Paderewski play professionally."
Absolutely.
Again, you know, in that performance of that wonderful nocturne, this incredible pedaling, which is almost the Chopin idea of pedaling. Chopin never putting the pedal down, according to published reports, always fluttering.
It was
constantly.
a flutter, absolutely. So the overtones of the piano would he would capture with his perfectly sensitized ear the instantaneous overtones of the piano, which in a room must have sounded so exquisitely colorful because of the blending. The piano is often heard to disadvantage in the modern world because of the large-scale halls that the big concert pianists have to play in.
You mean there's no reverberation off the walls?
No. And of course, Chopin was a salon pianist, and he played on a Pleyel, and you know, the circumstances were just very different. The magic of Hofmann, excuse me, is what he could do in a concert hall, evoking those kinds of sounds for apparently even the back row, according to those who heard him.
Okay, we'll pause right now, and then we'll be back.
My guest is Stan Waldoff, pianist who has played the E minor and F minor concerto, and we're going to now listen to the Romance, the E minor concerto's middle movement, one of the few extant recordings of Josef Hofmann. Would you like to hear it?
Oh, I'd love to.
Okay.
Love to, absolutely.
the Romance from the E minor Concerto of Chopin.
Yes, David is listening with his tongue hanging out.
as you were. It's
Always.
stupendous. Mad, as you said, you have never heard it played like that.
No.
It's the move. Now think of it. This was a performance that he did not know was being recorded. He might have played very badly, in his opinion, that night.
Yes, and then probably if you'd heard him the next night, it would have been totally different also.
Stories such as he'd come in a little late. He'd say to the conductor, "Which concerto tonight?"
Yeah. Oh.
Anyway.
Where was this recorded? Does it say?
Don't know, and this second I'm not interested. Let's.
Well, I'm just wondering, as a concerto performer, you saw the recording, you saw the film where he did the Beethoven.
Oh yes.
The Emperor. Was he in control, or the conductor, or was it
Oh no,
a mutual thing?
He was in control of it. Yes.
In other words, he had more to do with the interpretation and everything.
Tempo, everything. Yes, he was conducting. But let's hear the A-flat waltz, or the so-called 2/4 waltz.
Yes, and it is a marvelous performance. Very unlike Alfred Cortot, whom I personally
I know you adore. I know you adore. This is Chopin's Waltz, Opus 42. Stan, introduce it.
Yeah, well, we have a really rare treat, and that is to hear Hofmann play the same piece in two different ways, two versions. This will be the Minute Waltz of Chopin. Well,
This was recorded at...
the first one was recorded when, David?
The Academy of Music in 1938, and then we have, unfortunately, quite a bad quality recording, an encore from his famous Casimir Hall recital in Philadelphia in the right around the same time, which then goes into...
Yes, the last half Hofmann does his trick. He plays it in thirds.
In double thirds, and it's just extraordinary.
Or single thirds, as Beveridge Webster used to say. Double thirds would imply both hands.
Right.
Now this is the 1935 that we're playing first.
This is the 1938.
Oh, I see, because this is also 1938.
Well, he played the piece then
Okay.
3 times that year.
I'm just confused, but we'll get it right.
David is not beyond a mistake, as we've just seen. Impossible as it sounds.
Better close your mouth, David.
Just a delicious stunt. How'd you like those counterpoints? It's like 6 hands were...
four people playing. 4 people playing one piece. And how amazingly different the 2 performances. Again, the great artistry of Josef Hofmann. Never the same twice.
Mm-hmm. We are going to hear the last movement of the F minor concerto soon. But, Stan, why don't you read one of the programs that is printed in this book called The Amazing Marriage of Josef Hofmann.
Yeah. The book written by his wife, Marie Eustace, on the Great Russian tours.
Right, based on her diaries. And the text is just extraordinary. But some of these programs that he played...
Yeah, let me just give you an example of one. This was a concert February the 8th, 1907, right, in Kiev. And he begins with the Prelude and Fugue in G minor, Bach Liszt, then the Rondo Capriccioso of Mendelssohn, then the Waldstein of Beethoven, then 6 Etudes of Chopin, then the Si Oiseau Jeté of Henselt, If I Were a Bird, then Isolde's Liebestod, Wagner Liszt, then Au Bord d'une Source Liszt, the Don Juan Fantasy list. Then for encores, which in itself, I gather, took 2 or 3 days, the Berceuse of Chopin, the 12th Rhapsody of Liszt, the March Militaire of Schubert, the Rubinstein Valse Caprice, and the Rigoletto Paraphrase of Liszt.
Yeah.
I'm tired saying it.
An event, and just think of a program of such technical difficulty, the Don Juan Fantasy. Just unbelievable. Read another one. They're all over the place. She jotted down every program.
Yeah.
The repertoire was so vast in the early 1900s, and it was toned down considerably to very few works as he grew older.
Okay, why don't we pause right now, and then we'll get back to that.
All right.
All right. David, why don't you read another one of these marathons of Yef
yes,
in Russia?
As Mrs. Hofmann called him, Yef. This was a program of the 23rd of February in a Moscow Hall, 1907. And he opens with the Chromatic Fantasy and Fugue. Well, that's 12 minutes. Follows it with the Sonata in A-flat, Opus 110 of Beethoven. That's minimum 18 minutes. Followed by the Faschingsschwank aus Wien of Schumann, Carnival Scenes in Vienna. That's about 22 minutes. The Ballade in A-flat of Chopin, about 7 minutes. A Chopin Waltz, 2 or 3 minutes. The Sonata in B minor, the Sonata in B minor of Chopin, that is
about 28 minutes?
25 to 28 minutes, yes.
An hour and a half already.
Yes, a small piece by Hofmann himself. He did not, in 1907, have his Michel Dvorsky pseudonym. And then a once famous piece by his teacher, Anton Rubinstein, the F minor Barcarolle, a Liszt etude, the Spanish Rhapsody of Liszt, 13 minutes.
So we're pretty close to 2 hours already.
Encores, Rhapsody number 12 of Liszt, 10 minutes. Another Rubinstein work, Polka Bohème, and to conclude, the second Hungarian Rhapsody of Liszt.
Just fabulous. Was that the one where she said he gave it to show the students?
No, this, I couldn't even find the marathon recital, thank goodness.
There was one in there where Joseph gave a concert to show endurance for the students at the Moscow Conservatory.
Yes. Let's now continue with Hofmann in the finale, the last movement of the F minor concerto of Chopin, the second concerto, which is actually the first written, composed by Chopin at the age of 19 and a half. finale of the F minor Chopin Concerto with the immortal Josef Hofmann.
David, read that wonderful thing you found in the book about the program.
Yes, the long program I just read, which contained, beginning with the Chromatic Fantasy, 3 Hungarian Rhapsodies, ended it, and so forth. February 23rd.
Began in February and ended in December.
Yes, it started February 23rd, but it didn't end until February 24th because they wouldn't let him go till 1 in the morning. And she writes in the text that even before we could, and then they caught us in the street, and Jeff had to fling them off like dogs.
But read that marvelous thing.
But the program, this huge program with the Faschingsschwank and the late Beethoven Sonata that I read before, she writes, Jeff did not know 2 minutes before we left what his program was.
And I'm sure that's true, too, considering the vast repertoire. David, what are we going to talk about tomorrow?
Well, tomorrow we'll continue hearing movements from the concertos and...
Maybe the F minor ballade?
Indeed, the F minor ballade, which is...
Harold Schoenberg says the greatest recording ever made?
Indeed, I think Harold Schoenberg said something like that. The greatest piano performance on records. I mean, if it's possible to say...
Well, sounds like something we would have said.
Well, I'm trying to temper this.